The G20 summit is an annual meeting of the world's top 19 economies plus the European Union, which accounts for 85% of the entire global economy. This is the only time that these leaders gather in one room to discuss the world's biggest economic challenges. But heading into the meeting this year, North Korea stole the spotlight by just days earlier firing its most advanced missile to date. It posed South Korean President Moon Jae-in even more diplomatic challenges as he made his debut on the international stage. North Korea discussed within the G20 framework and on the margins of the meeting. The topic of our discussion on Peninsula 24 today.
이제 북한이 결정할 일만 남았습니다. 대화의장으로 나오는 것도 어렵게 마련된 대화의 기회를 거저 차는 것도 오직 북한이 선택할 일입니다.
And joining me in the studio, to my left is Dr. Bong Young-shik, a professor at Yonsei University Institute for North Korean Studies. Thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome.
And to my right, Dr. Seong-jong, professor of military studies at Daejeon University. Thank you also for coming all this way to Seoul.
It's my pleasure.
So let's talk about this North Korea being at the center stage at the G20. I think heading in, we did kind of have an idea that North Korea would surge to the front, although G20 is more of an economic platform. Did we all anticipate such launch by North Korea coming ahead of a big multilateral meeting?
Well, it was a happy coincidence for North Korea that not only the ICBM test was coincided with the Independence Day of the United States, which is the main target of North Korea's diplomatic engagement, and the inauguration of G20 summit meeting in Germany. So North Korea must have considered the timing that can be maximize its own intention to get the international attention on the grave and gathering threat of North Korea's nuclear and ICBM threats.
So it was more of a July 4th celebration, you would say?
And at the same time, North Korean leadership is so determined to complete its ICBM and nuclear technologies and capabilities as soon as possible. Then it will engage in diplomatic negotiations with the United States, China, and other countries from the position of the strength. So yes, considering the timing of the missile launch and nuclear tests are important for North Korean leadership, but at the same time, North Korean leadership has been so busy testing its own nuclear warhead and intercontinental missiles that there are a lot of overlapping timings of important political events and North Korea's experiments.
And a little bit of a behind-the-scenes story was that the U.S., in fact, President Donald Trump wanted to spell it out China, but then the others actually, pulled him back and said, why don't we just, go around that language and make it more diplomatic and not pinpoint that and not anger China so much, because the night before that, or the day before that, South Korea held talks, bilateral talks, for the first time by President Moon Jae-in with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Now, during the talks between South Korea and China, how do you think that went? What are you reading into that bilateral talks?
It is very important because not only because of North Korea's provocations and the influence China possesses on North Korea, but South Korea has been the main target of unjust economic retaliations by Xi Jinping government of China, which so far resulted in at least about $8 billion in the tourist and manufacturing industry of South Korea. And I think President Moon Jae-in made it really clear to China that the introduction of U.S. THAAD system is only defensive measure, and the reason why South Korea has agreed to grant the real estate for the deployment of U.S. THAAD system is because of growing threat of North Korea armed with nuclear weapons and ICBMs. So it is not just South Korea, ignoring China's, security concern, but it is a defensive measure that was imposed upon South Korea. If President Xi Jinping is correct that South Korea, you need to just step aside. North Korea's nuclear problem is not something that you are supposed to get involved. It is an issue between North Korea and the United States. This is exactly wording uttered by President Xi Jinping of China. Then South Korea make a similar remark in response to President Xi Jinping then. If that's the issue between North Korea and the United States, then China is not supposed to criticize and attack South Korea for the introduction of U.S. THAAD system in South Korea, which is a defensive measure in response to growing threat of North Korea's ICBM, targeting U.S. forces in South Korea and Japan. So there's a contradiction in Xi Jinping's position.
Well, the additional contradiction is that you remember the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, Davos Forum. You remember what he said? He proudly announced that he is going to be a protector of the international free trade, as opposed to the protectionism advocated by Donald Trump. I was wondering whether this is the way of realizing the free trade, the spirit, by retaliating economically for the political reason. I think that in that regard, that Xi Jinping is applying the double standard in that regard. As a G20 responsible country, which claims to be a number 2 country in the world as a G2 with the world leadership, he is bullying against the neighbors. That is the point. We have to keep that in mind.
Right. I mean, this G20 summit meeting is a very important and unfortunate lost opportunity for Xi Jinping government of China to emerge as a viable, even better, more acceptable alternative to the leadership of the United States under the presidency of Donald Trump.
Exactly.
He made a very great debut in Davos Forum, as you correctly pointed out, a few months ago, but Xi Jinping, in my personal opinion, failed to take advantage of the early momentum that was created, if not just automatically given to China in the back heel of the U.S. presidential election. Because, as you pointed out, that words of Xi Jinping do not match with China's action. Not only the China's linkage of political issues, which is the U.S.-Korea alliance and the introduction of that, with economic partnership between South Korea and China in the spirit of free trade, the words do not match with China's action.
At this point, I'd like to connect with our fellow in China to get a background on how the South Korea-China summit and the G20 altogether is being received on the ground in Beijing. For that, let's connect with Teng Zhao. He is a fellow at the Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy. Hello there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us, how is the Chinese government, how is the Chinese media describing the summit, the first ever by President Moon Jae-in and President Xi in Berlin this time around?
This year is the 25th anniversary of the establishing of the bilateral relationship, so they are very committed to building a better relationship. That message is very positive. With that said, President Xi, in his remarks, also mentioned specifically that he would like to see South Korea respect China's so-called core interests and critical concerns. So clearly, he is referring to the THAAD dispute. And I'm afraid as a result, the Chinese position on THAAD does not appear to have changed.
So obviously, over the months and years, we've seen North Korea's ICBM and so missile and nuclear ambitions increase. Should South Korea, should it not have its own defense system in order to counter North Korea's missile and nuclear program?
I think certainly South Korea has the right and actually the responsibility to build up its defensive capabilities against North Korea's increasing missile and nuclear threat. There's no doubt about it. China in the past has also expressed very little concern about the lower tier missile defense systems, such as the Patriot missile system deployed by South Korea. The only issue is China has a long-standing and deep political mistrust vis-a-vis Washington. And this is a similar mistrust that we have seen between Russia and the United States as well. Missile defense has been a major dispute, a major political issue between Moscow and Washington for decades. I'm afraid that given the deep political mistrust between Beijing and Washington, missile defense is going to be a major problem in the region in the coming years.
Well, I think you said it there, there's a political mistrust between U.S. and China, and South Korea perhaps might be being influenced by that. All right, fellow Tong Zhao at Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy there in China, thank you so much for your insights. So he said political mistrust between U.S. and China, and I think he nailed it there, that everything that's happening along the lines of South Korea-China relations, it has something to do with China and the U.S. as well. During the summit between South Korea and China, Xi Jinping did say there is a little something, and I'm actually taking it from his own words. There is something that is in the way of South Korea and China building more friendly ties, better, more solid ties. Do you think that China was directly referring to that?
I think so. Yes, it's about thought deployment, and with the election of more progressive-leaning Moon Jae-in government in South Korea, I guess the Xi Jinping government has been motivated to make another push. I have to tell my Chinese fellows, because whether that will actually serve China's core national interest in the long run, because the more pressure China is going to impose on South Korea, whether it's political, security, or economic, it further forces South Korea to get closer to joining the trilateral security cooperation with US and Japan, especially with Japan, overcoming the historical antagonisms and territorial issues. Mm-hmm. That's not what China wants. That's exactly shaping of so-called China encirclement led by the United States. Mm. So why Xi Jinping government wants to force the hands of Moon Jae-in government to make a choice that goes against China's core national interest? That's my first point. Second point is that Xi Jinping described that the nuclear issue is between North Korea and the United States. That's premised upon the belief that the ICBM, potentially topped with miniaturized nuclear warheads by North Korea, will only target the United States and maybe Japan, maybe South Korea. What if North Korea will have completed its nuclear and ICBM capabilities and threaten China as a new target? Because that's what exactly happened when Henry Kissinger went to China and succeeded in persuading China on diplomatic normalization with the United States. As a result of the diplomatic normalization with the United States, the Mao Zedong government of China changed the direction of China's nuclear ICBMs, targeting the United States to targeting the Soviet Union. Can anyone really perfectly guarantee that once Pyongyang will have completed its ICBM nuclear technology, it will only use them against US, Japan, and South Korea, but not China? Who can guarantee that North Korea will never use nuclear weapons once it will have acquired complete nuclear capability toward China?
Well, I think that you have a very intriguing hypothesis. I think that you said that the G20 equals G8, 19 plus 1.
Yeah.
That is a message never be lost to China and Russia. I think that everybody knows that the influence of the United States is declining. Perceived influence, not in reality or in the factual sense. That means that the United States is leaving a power vacuum, which can be taken by China and Russia. You know how close they are. Coincidentally, when the North Korea tested the ICBM missile, coincidentally, Xi Jinping was visiting Moscow. And there was a joint statement which said that the relationship between Russia and China is at the best in history. That is the message, which means that we are forming a united front targeting the United States. I think it is a great opportunity for North Korea to take advantage. I think that the emboldened posture of the Xi Jinping is in keeping with the perceived sense of the declining U.S. power and influence. And then he knows that the very weak link in the alliance system, global alliance system, is Rock and U.S. So he's keep beating at it and again and again and again. He knows that he's overreacting. However, he cannot stop because of I think that personally, President Moon Jae-in might hint at he might stop installing the THAAD system if only if the North Korea nuclear problem could be resolved. I think it might be interpreted in different ways. In the United States, he promised President Moon promised that the THAAD will be deployed under any circumstances. However, he left a very vague room for negating that kind of promise.
Now, let's go back a little further into President Moon Jae-in's trip to Germany. He did convey or deliver a so-called Berlin Declaration. What are you reading into that?
Not declaration, but vision.
Okay, Berlin Vision.
I personally think that content-wise, there was nothing so impressive or innovative. Because had it been read or announced by any other previous South Korean presidents, for instance, former President Park Geun-hye or former President Lee Myung-bak, except for the mentioning of South Korea's support for signing a peace treaty, it would have been the same. It's just a combination of all the initiatives already proposed by previous governments. So there's nothing really creative or new. And I have a problem with the rhetoric of Moon Jae-in government that South Korea has been endorsed by all the related parties, including China and the United States, to take driver's seat to manage the Korean affairs or dealing with North Korea. There's nothing wrong for South Korea to take driver's seat. But what's the point of sitting in the driver's seat if you do not have a car key or fuel? From the stand of North Korea, which has declared that it is already de facto nuclear state with ICBMs, ready to target anywhere in the world. There are only two countries that can offer what North Korea wants in exchange for abandoning its nuclear and missile programs. That's United States holding the car key in the realm of security, peace treaty included. And in terms of fuel of the car, it's China. My question is, all the good intentions aside, can South Korea provide North Korea a type of package that will sufficiently persuade North Korean leadership to exchange their nuclear warheads and ICBMs or ICBM type of long-range missiles in exchange for promise of economic prosperity and peace treaty and security assurance. North Korea would rather look at United States and China, not South Korea, if it hopes to get that kind of package. So content-wise, it is a repetition of previous proposals, like the Dresden Declaration by President Park Geun-hye. And I appreciate Moon Jae-in government's bold initiatives and commitment to giving diplomacy a legitimate chance to work. But if we be realistic and see things from the standpoint of North Korea still has sufficient reasons to prioritize dealing with United States, not with South Korea.
You're right. My point is that what is the point of being a driver? What does that mean to be sitting at the driver's seat? You talked about the fuel and the car key, but my concern is the roadblock. You have a roadblock in the middle of the road. Mm-hmm. How can you go through that? I think that the President Moon wants to be the faithful follower of the Roh Moo-hyun and Kim Dae-jong, the predecessors. I think that he has to understand the huge differences between now and then. At one time, North Korea's nuclear weapons were negotiable, but today it's off the limit. It's off the table. It's never,
no longer negotiable because it's already there. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And in the six-party talks, we were one of them. But I think that the North Korea will never agree to talk to us because it's none of your business from the North Korean perspective. The only chance that they will agree to sit on the table is as a nuclear power, de facto nuclear power, and about the nuclear arms control or reduction, whatever, with the United States. I think that as Dr. Bong pointed out, that it's very admirable for him to lay out his vision. He will meet Kim Jong-un anytime and any place. He also emphasized the humanitarian and aid or culture exchange and non-political cooperation. And he has to prioritize his agenda. You cannot entertain all the people at the same time, the United States and North Korea and China and his supporter, and then he's the opposing, the conservative groups, domestic context. I think that at this point in time, he has to sit back and be cool, calm, and collected, and figure out what is the highest the priority he has to focus on. Otherwise, if he missed the point, it's like building a castle on the sand. On sand. Therefore, right. He will greatly regret afterward. Therefore, he has to prioritize and keep focus on what is the most important thing and take one step at a time.
Right. Okay, so if you can sum up the G20 plus the Germany trip by President Moon and the achievements and the perhaps shortfalls in 2 words, achievements and shortfalls.
Achievement, persistency in his vision and political philosophy in domestic politics, human-centered politics, and his vision of foreign relations expressed in G20 mini, like escape from the reliance upon nuclear power plants and more use of renewable energy. That has a very direct linkage with his domestic initiatives. Mm-hmm. And his focus on human-centered economy is not just a propaganda in international scene, but also a very central program in his plan to revive South Korea's national economy. So I think the foreign policy team of the new Moon Jae-in government was really thoroughly and well prepared for the G20 summit meeting.
Shortfalls?
Shortfalls, as I said, that vision is good, but you have to see things as they are. Mm. You have to come up with a very solid and pragmatic steps to realize your vision step by step.
I think that it was a rather successful debut for President Moon, and there is the positive side, but on the downside, there are too many wishful thinking involved in his vision. Therefore, you have to have a sense of reality. And as I said, he has to cool and calm and collected and have best coordination with the friends and allies, and then proceed from there. You should not overreact, or you have to too eager to have achievement in very short period of time.
And I have no doubt that coming back from the trip, he'll get many feedbacks like yours from his team and his advisors and whatnot. So hopefully next time around we'll see more achievements, more solid ones, and more step forward than a status quo. So thank you, Dr. Bong, for coming and sharing your thoughts and ideas.
You're welcome.
And thank you for coming all the way from Daejeon to share your thoughts.
Thank you, my pleasure.
And thank you for staying all throughout. We'll see you next week on Peninsula 24.